I sank into the leather armchair by my apartment window, letting the late autumn sun brush against my face. The city stretched beneath me, gleaming towers reflecting a life I'd quietly built, piece by piece. My phone buzzed, dragging me from the tranquility I'd carved out for myself. A message from Mom. "Thanksgiving dinner, you're expected." I felt a twinge, part irritation, part something older, deeper. The last time I'd been home, my father had laughed when I told him I was managing my own business. He said, "We don't have a daughter who does that." Even now, those words lingered, sharper than the cold wind outside. I adjusted the silk of my blouse, smooth against my skin, trying to settle the tension curling in my stomach. I'd done everything, paid for every holiday gift, sent checks for repairs, contributed quietly, but no recognition, no warmth, just dismissal. And yet, sitting here, overlooking the city that had become mine, I realized I didn't need it. Not anymore. Still, the idea of walking back into that house, hearing the same sneers, the same disbelief, it twisted something inside me. But I also felt a spark of something deliciously defiant. Maybe this time, I wouldn't just come back. Maybe this time, they'd see. Really see. I tapped my phone, staring at the message again, and smiled faintly, almost to myself. The dinner invitation felt less like an obligation and more like an opening. A chance to rewrite the story they thought they'd already written for me. I was 18, the last time I truly felt like I belonged at that dining table. The air was heavy with the smell of roasted turkey and Mom's cinnamon-scented candles, but my father's words cut through it like a knife. "I don't know why you even bother with this business nonsense," he said, arms crossed, leaning back in his chair. "You should focus on finishing college and finding a husband. That's what a daughter does." My hands were clammy, clutching the corner of the tablecloth as my chest tightened. I opened my mouth, trying to argue, to explain, but no words came out. The lump in my throat made me swallow painfully, my heart hammering against my ribs. My voice, when it finally emerged, sounded smaller than I felt. I just want to try." Mom looked away, trying to hide her discomfort, but it was useless. Dad's gaze was fixed, dismissive, as if I were invisible. In that moment, I realized something fundamental. I couldn't rely on their approval. Their love had strings, and their support came only when I fit their narrow mold. Later that evening, I sat on my bed, staring at the faded photograph of my grandmother. She had passed when I was 12, but I still kept her locket close, a tiny silver anchor in my hand. Her handwriting in my journal echoed in my mind. "Darling, never shrink for anyone. The world is wide enough for all of your dreams, and your courage will take you further than their doubt ever could." I traced the locket absent-mindedly, feeling its weight, its promise. The next morning, I made a choice. I would leave, not running, but stepping forward, building my own path. No one could dictate my worth, my dreams, or my life. I packed a small suitcase, tucked the locket around my neck, and whispered to myself, "I'll show them. Not for them, but for me." The fear was real, the uncertainty overwhelming. But even in that trembling moment, there was a spark, a recognition that this was my turning point. The day I decided that independence was not just a goal, it was survival, and it would be magnificent. The first weeks after leaving home were terrifying. I slept on a borrowed futon at my college friend's apartment, surviving on instant noodles and the occasional coffee someone else bought me. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between survival and self-doubt. But in the chaos, I discovered a clarity I had never known. I was entirely, terrifyingly responsible for my own life, and that realization was both frightening and liberating. I found a small internship at a boutique marketing firm. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, and the hum of fluorescent lights became a background soundtrack to my determination. My mentor, a seasoned woman named Clara, took one look at me during my first shaky presentation and didn't offer pity. She offered expectation. "You have ideas," she said simply. "Now make them matter." I threw myself into work with a ferocity I didn't know I had. Late nights became routine, my laptop my constant companion. I learned to pitch ideas, negotiate contracts, and refine my instincts. Some days, I cried silently in my office, frustration bubbling up as I faced clients who doubted me because I was young, because I was a woman. But I refused to let their skepticism define me. Small victories accumulated, almost unnoticed at first. My first client, a local brand, agreed to a proposal I had painstakingly crafted. The first sale that gave me more than pocket money. Each step forward was a brick in the foundation of my independence. I kept it all quiet from my family. My social media posts were modest, carefully curated snapshots that hinted at normalcy rather than triumph. Every message I sent home was a careful balance of affection and omission, hiding the life I was quietly building. I didn't want their validation. I wanted my own. By the time I was 24, I had launched my first independent project, a small consultancy helping emerging brands grow online. The first major client was a revelation, a moment when I realized I was no longer the girl who had left home with nothing but a locket and a dream. The office space I rented was modest, but it felt like a palace compared to my old bedroom. I furnished it with intention, the photograph of my grandmother on the wall, a journal with scribbled ideas, and a sense of pride that no one could take away. Success didn't come overnight. Each step was painstaking, every milestone hard-won. But as I walked home at night, city lights reflecting in my tired eyes, I felt an unfamiliar confidence. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the thought of returning home, once terrifying, began to take on a new flavor: anticipation. One day they would see me, not the girl they dismissed, but the woman I had become. The cab pulled up to my parents' suburban home just as the first leaves of November were drifting across the driveway. My heart thumped, not from fear, but from anticipation. I had spent years building a life they couldn't see, and now I was stepping back into the place that had once tried to define me. I opened the front door carrying a modest tote of store-bought desserts, the familiar smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin spice immediately flooding my senses. Mom greeted me with that warm, hesitant smile she always saved for holidays, but Dad didn't. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised, a flicker of condescension still lingering. "Dinner's in an hour," he said, his tone clipped, the same old command. "We didn't expect you to show up with whatever that is." I smiled softly, placing the desserts on the counter, careful to keep my expression calm. Inside, I felt the controlled surge of power. Years of hidden work, silent victories, sleepless nights, and risk-filled days had all led to this moment. I wasn't the daughter who had left that room years ago trembling and uncertain. I was a woman they hadn't dared to imagine. As we sat down for dinner, I took a moment to look around. Everything looked the same on the surface: polished hardwood floors, a carved dining table, family portraits on the wall. But I noticed little details that underscored the life I had created outside their limited vision. The confidence in my posture, the subtle shine of the watch on my wrist, the quiet assurance in the tone of my voice. "Dad," I said finally, letting my words land softly but firmly, "I thought you might like to know something before dessert." He raised a brow, curiosity breaking through skepticism. Mom tilted her head, sensing the shift in the room. "I run my own consultancy," I began, watching the room. "We work with national brands. I've expanded into multiple states. And I'm the majority owner. I'm financially independent. I've built something I'm proud of." The silence that followed was immediate, palpable. Dad's fork paused midair, his eyes wide, almost disbelieving. Mom's hand went to her chest, as if to steady herself. "I didn't tell you before," I continued, letting each word sink in, "because I wanted to build my life on my own terms. I wanted to make sure it was real, not just a promise. And now you see it." Their faces shifted in real time. Dad's jaw tightened, an uncomfortable flush creeping across his cheeks. Shame, disbelief, and something like awe flickered in his expression. Mom's eyes shimmered with tears she hadn't expected to shed. You did all this?" Dad stammered, voice lower than usual, a hint of vulnerability breaking through years of authority. Without our support? I nodded. Without anyone's approval. I didn't need it. The room was quiet except for the faint clinking of silverware. But the energy had changed. I wasn't the timid, dismissed girl they remembered. I was a force, self-made, confident, unshakable. And for the first time in years, they were seeing me clearly. Really seeing me. The room felt different now, electric, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. I could see it in their eyes. Realization, awe, a flicker of guilt. I had the upper hand, not in a cruel way, but in the calm authority of someone who had worked for every ounce of their disbelief. Before we continue, I said, setting my fork down and meeting Dad's gaze, there are some things we need to address. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Mom looked at me expectantly, as if bracing for a storm. I've spent years building this life, step by step. And I'm willing to share parts of it, but only on terms that respect what I've become, I explained, my voice steady, firm but not unkind. This means honesty, responsibility, and growth. No more dismissals. No more treating me as if my dreams aren't valid. And each of you has to make changes in your own lives. Dad blinked. Changes? What do you mean? I leaned back slightly, letting my words flow with clarity. Mom, you've always held yourself back because of fear of disapproval. I want to see you pursue what you've put on pause, whatever it is that lights you up. Dad, you need to stop holding everyone to the versions of them you think you understand. Respect isn't given, it's earned, yes, but it's also chosen. You will treat me and anyone I bring into my world as equals, not as extensions of old ideas. They were silent, the air thick with reflection. I continued. I'm not punishing you. I'm giving you an opportunity to change, to grow. If you're willing to meet me halfway, then we can build a healthier relationship, one that doesn't carry the weight of past misunderstandings or old biases. But the choice is yours, not mine. Mom's eyes shimmered, wet with tears she hadn't anticipated. She reached across the table and touched my hand lightly, a tentative gesture of connection. Dad looked down, jaw tight, clearly working through his pride and discomfort. I didn't ask for this life because I wanted to punish anyone, I said, softer now. I did it because I needed to survive, to thrive, to claim myself. But if you're willing to step into the future with me, we can have something better than what we had before, something built on respect, honesty, and growth. There was a pause, long enough for the room to settle into a new rhythm. And then, slowly, small nods, tentative acknowledgments, subtle promises of change. I felt the shift. Finally, the power I had built was not just financial or professional, but emotional. I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. I was inviting them into a partnership, but only as equals. I smiled gently, letting the moment breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't shrinking. I was the author of this family story now, and I had chosen strength, compassion, and clarity as my pen. The rest of the evening unfolded differently than any Thanksgiving before. Conversations were softer, more genuine, edges smoothed by acknowledgement and tentative respect. I watched my parents, noticing subtle shifts. Dad laughing without the old superiority, Mom sharing stories she'd never told me before. It was as if a weight had lifted from the room, one that neither of us realized had been pressing down for years. I caught myself glancing at the locket my grandmother had given me, hidden beneath my blouse. The silver charm gleamed faintly, a quiet reminder of her words. Your courage will take you further than their doubt ever could. That courage had led me here, not just to success, but to reclamation of my life, my dignity, and my voice. Later, as I helped clear the table, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Mom smiled, eyes brimming with something close to pride. You've become someone incredible, she said softly. We just needed to see it for ourselves. Dad, standing nearby, met my gaze with a tentative expression. I'm proud of you, he admitted, voice low but sincere. And I'm sorry for not recognizing it sooner. I nodded, the swell of emotion catching me briefly off guard. Forgiveness didn't come instantly, and neither did old wounds vanish. But the room was warmer now, grounded in understanding rather than expectation. That night, as I lay in bed back at my apartment, the city lights twinkling below, I reflected on everything: the rejection, the struggle, the victories, the revelation. I had endured the pain, yes, but it had forged the woman I had become, resilient, independent, unapologetically herself. I reached for my journal, opening to the page where my grandmother's words were etched in delicate ink. Smiling, I whispered to the quiet apartment, "I didn't just survive, I thrived. And I'll never shrink again." The Thanksgiving that had once promised judgment and dismissal had transformed into a celebration, not just of family, but of courage, growth, and reclaiming my story. The power I had quietly amassed wasn't just wealth or success. It was the strength to define my own identity and the grace to invite those I loved into that life on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt whole. And as I closed my eyes, I knew this was only the beginning. Not of proving them wrong, but of living fully, boldly, and unshakably as myself.